My daughter and her family may not have minded having a ghost for a roommate, but I sure didn't care for it. My family has owned and farmed this land on Cow Creek for well over 100 years. Early records indicated that my great-great-aunt Mary Jane Reynolds Fox and her husband George Fox owned this whole place and had an old home place on the plot where my daughter now lives. Mary Jane and George did not have a happy marriage. There were fights and turmoil. The neighbors had said they worried for Mary Jane with how George would carry on and treat her. I suppose that all finally came to a head when George shoved Mary Jane one night. She fell back, hitting her head, and passed away from her injuries. Everyone believed it was an accident, but they also believed that it only occurred because of George. Following her death, Mary Jane was buried near the home, but soon after, George reported that Mary Jane was haunting him. He would hear noises, things would move around, and it got to a point where George took the drastic step of having her coffin dug up and moved further up the hill away from the house. Unfortunately for him, moving Mary Jane had no effect on the strange occurrences. On the long wall where the saddles and stirrups were hung, it would sound like someone was running past them in the night as they would rattle and bounce together. George eventually remarried and the haunting continued. Finally, the family had had enough and moved off the property. Even when the home was empty, the neighbors would report constantly hearing noises coming from the old home. Families would move in and leave having experienced unexplained phenomena. A long while later, the home was torn down, and my wife and I purchased the farm. We moved into a home built in the 1940s and lived there for many years, never experiencing the first thing. We strongly doubted any of the old stories, especially since our home had always been quiet. Many years later, our daughter Andy and her husband and 3 children built a house on the side of the old Mary Jane Reynolds Fox home. Unexplained things started happening the day they moved in. Toys would move, the TV would go on and off, pictures would crash to the floor. Children even claimed to see Mary Jane. Oddly, though, Mary Jane seemed to like the children and would do things to protect or delight them. When a child was stuck in a ditch, another was alerted by a fan, frantically turning on and off. When Andy tried to replace a picture of the children with the print came flying off the wall repeatedly until it broke. When someone would enter the children's bedrooms, the doors would shut. Mary Jane seemed not to bother the family at all, though she was a hard pill for me to swallow. One summer, my daughter and her family had gone out of town and left me to watch the home. While checking on things and feeding the animals, I noticed my grandson's bedroom was in a state, with toys and books strung around. I decided as a kindness to clean it for their return when I noticed the baby monitor was on in his room. Not sure what possessed me, but I leaned into the monitor and said, "Yoo Hoo Mary Jane!" At that moment, a rubber snake I'd just shut in the toy box in the closet came flying across the room and landed in the middle of the newly cleaned floor. I took off out of there. I suppose it didn't matter where they buried Mary Jane. They couldn't keep her from her home and from protecting her family.